Welcome to the Generations at Work podcast, where our goal is to build bridges rather than walls between generations at work. Today, I'm especially excited because I have one of my, I'm going to say, Arthur, long distance mentors. You didn't know that, but you are with us today. Arthur Brooks, who completely shifted careers a few years back. I'm going to have you talk about. And you're doing now what you believe is the most purposeful thing you can do at this stage of your life. So thank you, Arthur, for joining us today.
Thank you, Tim. It's great to be with you.
Yeah. So I need to tell you, I hope to not make you feel awkward, but the best book, hands down, that I have read the last 5 years was From Strength to Strength. It just hit me at the right time. I walked down the staircase at my house and said to my wife, I'm so happy. I literally said that. And it was just a great moment because what you had in that book was so meaningful for the life station I'm in. So today you are talking to business leaders on this podcast who lead and manage multiple generations, so different life stations are under their care. I'd like you to start by talking a little bit about Raymond Cattell's research, where he talks about how our brain morphs a little bit between fluid and crystallized intelligence. Would you mind sharing that?
I'd be delighted to. And thank you, Tim. Thank you for your kind words about the book. I wrote the book for you. And I also
Thank you.
wrote the book for me
Yeah,
because the truth of the matter is that hardworking strivers, people who are ambitious, taking a bite out of life, trying to do everything they can with their lives and careers,
yeah.
the world doesn't have much advice for them.
Mhm.
The truth is that when things are going well and then you don't understand why you suddenly are taking less interest in your work or why
Yeah,
work that used to be easy feels harder,
yeah.
there's nobody there to give you advice about that because if you've been successful, you're the one giving the advice.
Yeah, yeah,
And when I found that I was confronting these issues in my own career, I've always been very ambitious. I was very hardworking, and I was burning out, and I didn't know why. I mean, I didn't have good reasons for it, and it
mhm,
wasn't some work-life balance
yeah,
issue. And I went
yeah.
looking for the answers, and I found that I actually had to do the research myself. And once I did it to my own satisfaction, I wound up publishing it as a book, which is From Strength to Strength.
Yeah.
Now, there's a key scientific point behind the transitions that we naturally make that you just alluded to. The great intelligence researcher, British intelligence researcher Raymond Cattell, he didn't just do IQ testing. That's not that interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, some people do that, but what's really interesting about intelligence is not how high or low it is, but rather how it changes over the course of your life and how that determines what you're really good at and what you're really interested in and
Yeah.
how that changes.
Yeah.
So hardworking people really need to understand how their intelligence is going to change. Early on, Cattell found you have a lot of what's called fluid intelligence.
Yeah.
That's your ability to solve problems autonomously, to use your working memory, to focus intensively, to innovate in ways that other people haven't before. You're kind of a ninja in what you're, and
Yeah.
the harder you work and the more you learn, the better you get at solving problems. That tends to go up and up and up through your 20s and 30s. That's what makes stars in almost any brain-oriented profession, from doctors to lawyers to financial professionals to executives, all the people who are listening to this podcast.
Yeah.
That tends to peak, however, much earlier than anybody thinks.
Mm.
It peaks in your late 30s, latest early 40s. That's what Raymond Cattell found. And then it starts to fall. And people feel like they're falling apart.
Yeah.
And so this is one of the reasons that people in their mid 40s, they tend to experience burnout from their first career. They say, I don't know, man, I used to love it, but I don't
Yeah.
anymore. And there's a reason for this. We are built for progress. Strivers are built to get better at what they do. And when you find you're not getting better at it anymore, you don't like it anymore, and you don't know why.
Yeah.
That's why. Now, that's bad news, but there's really, really good news because Cattell says that that's just the first kind of intelligence.
Yeah.
Later in life is crystallized intelligence. So the first is fluid, the second is crystallized. Crystallized intelligence comes on strong in your 30s and 40s, and then it goes higher in your 50s and 60s and stays high into your old age.
Wow.
It's very different than fluid intelligence. It doesn't require a lot of working memory, thank God.
Yeah. That's right.
It also is not built on indefatigable focus or innovation. Innovation falls. I mean, the Rolling Stones' best songs were written in their 20s,
Yep.
unambiguously. That's
Yep.
just the way it is. You know, T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound, literally their best poems were written in their 20s.
Yeah. Yep.
Poetry is a highly fluid intelligence profession, these creative professions.
Yeah.
Crystallized intelligence is about wisdom, all the
Mhm.
things that you know and how to use it. You become a talent scout, you become a teacher,
Yeah.
you become a mentor, you become a pattern recognizer. And so the creativity that you have is not the original new flash of ideas.
Yeah.
It's recognizing other people's ideas when they're good and how they relate to each
Mhm.
other. So you can actually
Yeah.
build a team of really good people. So if at 31 you're a startup entrepreneur, at 61 you're a venture capitalist.
I
You know,
see.
if
Yeah.
you're a star litigator at 29, at 59 you should be the managing partner of your law firm
Mhm. Yeah.
because that's really where your skills lie and that's more satisfying. So you go from innovator to instructor
Yeah.
and that's actually if you lean into that in your own profession in your own way, it turns out you'll be much happier even than you were on the first curve.
I love that. So we don't, which is why the title, From Strength to Strength. You have a strength here and now you move on. And what a great repurposing of that psalm. I just love what you did. Now, I want to have you give a couple of illustrations. In the book, I loved how you capsulized Charles Darwin's life story and then Johann Sebastian Bach. Talk about that.
Yeah. So one of the things that I talk about a lot in the book, now it's a behavioral science book. I'm a behavioral scientist. So
Yes. Yeah.
I'm talking about a lot of studies, I'm talking about a lot of science, but I try to tell a lot of stories that are evocative of real people's lives.
Yeah.
And not just people you've never met, but people you've heard of a lot.
Yeah.
The characteristic of high achievers early in life is that they tend to stay stuck on their first curve
Mm,
and they wrote it up, which was great, but then
yeah.
they write it down, which is not
Mhm.
great.
Yeah.
And a classic case of this is Charles Darwin. I mean, if you listed the world's greatest behavioral or natural scientists of the past 500 years, he's on your list,
Yeah.
obviously. I mean, and his early successes are just incredible. He came up with, or he introduced his idea of natural selection to the world at age 27
Wow.
when he finished his voyage aboard the Beagle, that sailing ship that went around the world for 5 years. And he came back, he said, I have a theory that links the fossil record with current animals and plants. It's
Mhm.
called evolution,
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah.
And this changed almost overnight. He became the world's most famous scientist almost overnight, certainly European. And he dined out on that for a long time. He was developing these theories for the next 25 years, but his ability to come up with new stuff stagnated as he got older, and he didn't know why. Now we know why. He
Yeah.
was he had outlasted his fluid intelligence
Yeah.
curve,
Yeah.
and he didn't understand this, and so the result was he was always trying to do new things, and he wasn't very successful at doing
Yeah.
new things, and he felt that his work was derivative. He couldn't start new experiments. His field passed him by. All the young Turks
Yeah.
that had better mathematical and statistical talent than he did, they passed him by. He was very depressed by the time he died.
Wow.
You know, he said there was nothing that he enjoyed. He kind of died. He went to his grave feeling like a charlatan,
Ah.
even though he wasn't.
Yeah.
But the problem was he wasn't on the right
Yeah.
curve, and he
Yep.
didn't know that. And that's what a lot of strivers have in common. They try to stay on their first curve.
Yeah.
More, 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 more,
Yes.
more innovation. Those great innovators who get on the second curve
Mm,
by becoming the great teachers of their time,
mm,
they thrive. And
yes.
the classic case that you just mentioned is Johann Sebastian Bach, maybe the world's greatest composer.
Yeah.
He was the innovator of the high Baroque early in his career. I mean, princes were seeking him out to
Yeah.
give him commissions, and he was the most venerated innovator in the high Baroque idiom of music of his time. But about age 50, music passed him by and he didn't understand. Actually, it was earlier than that. It was in his 40s.
Yeah.
Actually, his son, his third son, Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, he actually innovated and took music away from the high Baroque into a new era called the classical period.
Unbelievable.
And that classical music was this new idiom that the father, he couldn't write in. So he could have been like Darwin and shaking his fist at the
Yeah.
heavens and
Yeah.
feeling inadequate.
Yeah.
And no, he didn't though. Instead, he moved on. He moved on to become the most beloved teacher of his generation.
Wow.
He was teaching, he was actually writing a textbook of the high Baroque when he died, saying maybe somebody will want to know this about this in the
Yes.
future, but it's in God's hands.
Yes. Yes.
And because he was a very, very dedicated Christian. I mean,
Huh.
he was really devoted to his Christian life as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
He also was teaching the organ, which was his passion. He was teaching compositional techniques. He was directing a choir. And when he died, he was less famous, but he was surrounded by, he had 20 children, by the way, which is
Wow.
pretty
Yeah.
productive. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think 10 of them survived. He was surrounded by his children. He was surrounded by his many grandchildren. He
Mm.
was surrounded by his beloved students. And he was remembered at the time of his death as the greatest teacher of his generation. It was only 100 years after he died that his music was resurrected by another composer named Felix Mendelssohn. And then the high Baroque came back into fashion, as it still is today,
Yeah.
by the way. He
Yeah.
would be shocked to know that he's considered widely to be the greatest composer who ever lived. He thought he was forgotten as a composer and remembered as a teacher.
Yeah.
But
That's wild.
the point is, Bach died happy because he
Yes.
died on his crystallized intelligence curve.
Yes.
He wasn't trying to stick on the old one, which was down in the tank, which is
Yeah.
in the cellar.
You know what I'm thinking, Arthur, as you're talking, is so often we try to solve an internal problem with an external. We buy the red Ferrari, we get a new wife. We try to do because we're not feeling right about our lives. And you're saying, no, it's an internal thing you need to do.
Right. Yeah, they're making the wrong changes. And
Yeah.
so they're trying to
Yeah.
feel more youthful by doing what youthful people would probably do.
Hmm.
Fast car,
Yeah.
a convertible,
Yeah.
make it red,
That's true.
inappropriate person in the passenger seat.
Yes.
That
Yes.
makes me feel younger again. And
Yeah.
if I get this injection of youth into my
Yeah.
life in my mid 40s or 50s, then I'm going to go backward on that curve somehow. Some
Yeah.
sort of alchemy in my life is going to make that work.
Yeah.
And that's not the right thing to do. Don't
Yeah.
get a new wife, get on a new curve.
Yeah. Love it. I love
I
it.
mean, actually, get on the right kind of curve.
That's
Don't
right.
look at those curves.
Great point. Great point.
Yeah.
So you find yourself these days in front of Harvard University students. So you've got
Yeah.
18 to 22-year-old young adults in there.
Actually, they're older. I teach graduate
Ah,
students,
you
so
do?
my
Okay.
average
So
student is 28.
20
Yeah.
somethings, but still
Yeah.
in the first curve.
Sure. Yeah.
But I'd like you to talk about how do you communicate differently, perhaps, to a
Right.
young adult than you would maybe if you were managing 50 somethings.
Yeah. So my career is really dedicated to serving strivers. And
I
I
like that.
have, and so that book, the book that we're talking about here is for second curve strivers.
Mhm.
When I'm teaching at Harvard, I'm talking to first curve strivers,
Yes.
and first curve strivers have different problems. They need to understand their fluid intelligence curve.
Yeah.
They need to be making plans so that, God willing, they can get to a second curve at some point by understanding what's going to happen. So I have a whole series of lectures that I give my students called the crystal ball. Here's
Huh.
what's going to happen to your tastes. Here's what's going to happen to your personality. Here's going to happen to your skills. Here's what's going to happen to your relationships. I have the data, man.
Yeah.
I'm a behavioral
Yeah.
scientist, and so I talk about that. But I take on the unique, for first curve strivers, the problems that they have. The big problem that first curve strivers have is they tend to be deeply afraid of failure,
Yeah.
deeply addicted to success. In other words, they've been first curve strivers, the people who are listening to us who are in their 20s and 30s. They have a very common portrait, which is that they were very good students, they were high achievers as kids, and they tended to get all their sense of reward from being patted on the head by adults
Yeah.
in return for achieving in these outside rewards.
Yeah.
And so the result is they program into themselves the idea that I'm not enough unless I'm doing enough.
Yeah.
I'm not lovable unless I'm achieving enough. And furthermore, I don't even get my neurochemical rewards unless I'm doing a lot and winning.
Yes.
I'm getting good grades. I'm getting good SATs. I'm
Yes.
getting into the Harvard Business School. I'm getting a job at McKinsey. I'm making a bunch of money. And they get on this external rewards track so that they can feel like they're enough, they're lovable enough, that they're worthy. And that's a huge problem.
Yeah.
Now, that also
Yeah.
tends to, what that does is that leaches meaning from their lives.
Mm.
Meaning doesn't come from these external circumstances.
Yeah.
And this is exacerbated dramatically in a new generation that's so deeply addicted to devices.
Yeah.
So they tend to be lonely. They tend to be literally using the wrong side of their brain
Yeah.
for big sense of meaning. They're getting the rewards from the next gold star. And the
Yeah.
result is they tend to feel very empty and very insecure and very afraid. That's the first curve striver set of problems that
Wow.
I'm dealing with all the time in my teaching and what I'm doing with younger people in general.
Yeah. I'm not trying to lead you with this question, but do you lead them to say, let's do face-to-face conversations more? Or do you feel like, no, they know that, but
No, they don't know that.
oh, okay.
No, they don't know that. And they're wondering why, for example, About 62% of romantic relationships are initiated on the apps today.
Yeah.
62% is a lot. And they're wondering why they have more dates and less attraction. In other words, they
Yeah.
don't have successful dates,
Yeah.
and the relationships that start tend to be less stable than
Yeah.
they would be otherwise.
Yeah.
And they don't know why. And the reason is because these relationships are mediated electronically, so there's
Yeah.
not sufficient in-person information.
Hmm.
Furthermore, they're lonely because they're talking to friends on social media as opposed to in person. Then they're working with people by Zoom as opposed to face, and that's a big problem. Now, there's a
Yeah.
neurochemical problem in that. There's a neuropeptide in the brain that functions as a hormone called oxytocin. Most
Yeah.
of us know about that.
Yeah.
Oxytocin is the human bonding hormone, and you get it from eye contact and touch. You
Huh.
don't get it from what we're doing here, which
Yeah.
is a great tool because you can do your show with
Yeah.
anybody, any place,
Yeah.
but it's not a great way to work. And it's a horrible way to maintain your family and friendships.
Yeah.
It's an awful way because you're going to feel empty. You're going to have
Yeah.
trouble sleeping. You're probably going to compensate with excessive, highly glycemic carbohydrate consumption. You're going to become more sedentary. You're going to get, because you're getting lonelier. And there's a lot of this thing that gets, a lot of these pathologies are all rolled up together because you're literally missing this neurochemical reward that
Yeah.
you're seeking. And so
Yeah.
you binge on the technology and it gets worse. And so
Yes.
you binge more and it gets
Yeah.
worse. It's kind of like the worse my hangovers are, the more I drink.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so one of the things that I do is I talk to them about face-to-face relationships and I get them off the devices for entire periods of time during the
Wow.
day and whole modes of communication, and their lives really start to improve.
Love it. So this podcast is called Generations at Work, and we're really about how do we connect with the various generations. And I realize, by the way, that we can put too much emphasis on generations. There's so much more that informs our personality, our family of origin, etc. But share any insights you might have to a leader at a workplace that may have Gen Z, millennials, Xers, boomers that are about ready to retire. Any insights you might have on connecting with multiple generations that might not be like you?
Yeah, no, and this is as old as the hills. You go back and
Yeah.
Plato is talking about kids these days, and
Yes. Yes.
and 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 Jesus said, woe be unto this generation. And
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
truth is that even in living memory, we always talk about the greatest generation, which is virtually all dead at this point. They were
Yeah.
born between
Yeah.
1905 and 1925.
Yeah.
They were named the greatest generation by the greatest generation, right? And,
Yeah.
and, and the
That's right.
people who came after them
Yeah.
was 1925 to 1945. My parents,
Yeah.
they were called the silent
Uh-huh.
generation as a to cast aspersions on the fact that they weren't going to war.
Yep.
And they were just a bunch silent because they were just a bunch of slackers
Yeah.
as far as they were concerned. Now, my parents weren't slackers.
No.
The point is that they looked down on the baby boomers, and the baby boomers looked down on Gen X, and Gen X looked down on the millennials. And now the millennials think that Gen Z is, I mean, what a bunch of losers.
Yeah.
Who's actually really criticizing Gen Z? It's the millennials who are doing that.
Yes.
So there's one generation before that thinks that.
Yeah.
And so it's
Yeah.
really, I mean, I'm like the year that connected the baby boomers to Gen X.
Yeah.
And we're just like, we're just sitting back chuckling.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, you'll see. And the truth is, the big thing that a lot of people miss in generations is that generations do differ, but it's an age phenomenon more than it is a true generation phenomenon.
Yeah.
Now, this is complicated by the fact that technology has changed a lot between the generations. And so one of the uniquely difficult things about being Gen Z is not that houses are so much more expensive or the inequality is so much worse. I get that things have changed, but many things are so much better. I mean, you go with guys our age, and you're like, wait a second, you should have seen my crummy first apartment.
Yes.
That place was a dump,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
And part of it is my expectations were lower.
Yeah, right.
And you want to talk about the environment. Are you kidding me? You had to roll up the windows on the freeway in LA, and the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland was on fire. Plus, we had nuclear bomb drills under our desks.
That's right.
So
I remember.
boom.
Yeah.
So the truth is, some things are better and some things are worse. But the truth of the matter is that the technology that's intermediating relationship for Gen Z is uniquely harmful.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's something that really has changed. And that's why they actually are more depressed, have more anxiety, and are lonelier than generations that actually came before. And that's something we really need to address. That's a lot of what my work is about, because that's leading to a crisis of meaning. So Gen Z, the big difference is they're way less likely to be able to articulate the meaning of their lives because of the way that technology has actually changed the activity in their brains.
Yeah.
So that thing is real.
Yeah.
At work, however, most of the things that we complain about the new generation, so entitled,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they get so upset. That's everybody's been saying that about the generation before forever
Yeah.
and ever and ever. That's an age-related phenomenon. And guess what? The Gen Z is gonna grow up and complain about Gen Alpha.
Yes, it's true. It's very true. Yep. It's going to go on. So, I'd like to focus my last couple of questions, Arthur, on really your life's work. You focus a lot on happiness. And
Right.
by the way, I just finished Jeff Rosen's book, The Pursuit of Happiness.
That's a nice book.
Yeah, yeah. I was impressed because in many ways he echoes what you're saying. It's not the pursuit of pleasure,
Yeah.
it's about virtue. And would you talk a little bit about that and how that should really make sense as we age, as we go through our own life?
Yeah, no, this is what Jeff's book is about, and what really the ancient Greek philosophers and early Christians were talking about is that if you try to chase feelings, you'll be chasing them for the rest of your life.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and that's a misunderstanding of what happiness actually is. Happiness isn't
yeah,
a feeling. Feelings are evidence of happiness, but you wouldn't want to chase the smell of the turkey and then
yeah.
think that you're going to have a very satisfying Thanksgiving dinner. You need to understand
Right.
what happiness really is. The best scientific definition of happiness is a combination of enjoyment, satisfaction, and meaning. And to get those things, you
Okay,
actually
hold it.
need to know what you.
Say that. Can you say
Yeah,
that
I need to
again,
go
please?
slower on that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really good.
So happiness is a combination of enjoyment, which is not pleasure.
Right.
Enjoyment has pleasure in it, but it also has people and memory, so that it's
Mm,
adjudicated by the prefrontal cortex of the brain and not
yes.
just the ancient limbic system.
Yeah.
You do
Yeah.
not want to be managed by your pleasures. You'll wind up in rehab if you're
Yeah.
managed by your
Yeah.
pleasures. You want to manage your pleasures. And so that's what enjoyment is all about. The second is satisfaction, which is the joy that you get from your accomplishments after a struggle. Very
Yes.
important.
Yeah.
Only humans want to struggle and work hard. That's why happiness requires some unhappiness.
Mhm.
And most importantly is meaning.
Yeah.
Meaning is a combination of coherence, why things happen the way they do, purpose, which is goals and direction in life, and significance, why your life matters and to whom.
Wow.
And that's what my next whole book is about, is how to find more meaning in an age of emptiness, which is really coming from
Wow.
the technology that we're talking
Yeah.
about here. But those are the three things that we need. And to do that, as Jeff Rosen and many others, and not to mention Aristotle and Thomas
Yeah.
Aquinas and
Yeah.
Plato and
Yeah.
Socrates and
Yeah.
Cicero, and is that you got to know what you believe and live up to it.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's where the virtue really comes in. And so we're not hedonists. We
Yeah.
believe in eudaimonia, which is that ancient idea of, believe in something, live up to it. And it's not just stiff upper lip stuff and do your duty.
Yeah.
It's being the person that you want to be. That's really where the greatest source of at least meaning really comes in.
Yeah. I love that. So instead of the pursuit of just pleasure or the feeling of happiness, search for meaning, search for satisfaction.
And not pleasure at all. On the contrary,
Yeah.
it's enjoyment
Hmm.
and satisfaction with so you have to enjoy your life consciously. You have to take satisfaction in your accomplishments, and you have to know the meaning of your existence.
Yeah.
Those are the three big neuroscientific challenges
Yeah.
of being alive on earth. And
Yeah.
there's so much that goes into it. You can, that's what I teach my students. That's what I write my books about. That's what it comes down to. That's what I'm trying to pursue with my own
Yeah.
life, in
Yeah.
my own religious life, in my
Yeah.
family life,
Yeah.
in, what I'm actually trying to do as a person, as a
Yeah.
friend,
Yeah.
in my work.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down
I
to.
love it. I love the fact that you made a bold move that I referred to earlier. You were in charge of a think tank, weren't you? Weren't you in DC?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
said, "Oh my gosh." Well, I don't know if you said, "Oh my gosh," but your brain said, "Oh my gosh, I need to
Yeah.
do something." Would you mind talking about that decision real quick?
Yeah. Yeah, so I've changed careers. I've had four very distinctly, radically different careers, as a matter of fact. I started off as a French horn player.
Okay.
I was a classical musician.
Okay.
I left college when I unceremoniously left college at 19 at the invitation of the college. And part of the reason is because I just wasn't a motivated
Yeah,
student.
yeah.
I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do. But all I wanted to do was to play the French horn. I was a classical musician. There's a reason I know a lot about Bach, as a
Yes,
matter of
right,
fact. And
right.
so I went pro at 19, and I did that until I was 31.
Okay.
I played a bunch of seasons in the Barcelona Orchestra in
Wow.
Spain, and I was a professional horn
Yeah.
player during all that period. Now, at the end of that, I went back to college by correspondence and studied economics. I actually wanted to become an economist. And
Okay.
so at 31, I left music and started my PhD.
Okay.
After finishing my bachelor's degree, did my PhD. And at 34, I finished my PhD and became a college professor. I became
Okay.
an economics professor.
Okay.
And I did that for 10 years. And then I left as a professor. I was teaching at Syracuse most
Okay.
of that.
Yeah.
I joined the American Enterprise Institute as their president.
Okay.
That's one of the oldest think tanks in the world. And
Wow.
doing that was very interesting because I was managing a huge nonprofit,
Yeah.
raising about $50 million a
Wow.
year, a brand new challenge. I did that for 11 years. And then I retired from that, and I took a position of a professorship at Harvard and started a company on the science of happiness that
Yeah.
I'm bringing to people all around the world today. So it's been four very distinct things. I've kind of taken my career down to the studs a bunch of times and rebuilt it.
Well, what I love is you're practicing what you preach. You are now pouring into people, and I know you do other things as well, but I love the fact that what you've written out in your last couple of books that I read, the one you did with Oprah and then Strength to Strength, has just been so meaningful. I am just,
That's why I do it. I appreciate that an awful
yeah.
lot. I mean, there's so many people doing so many good things.
Mhm.
My job is to lift people up and bring them together in bonds of happiness and love using science and ideas.
Wow.
That's the mission statement of my life
I love it.
that I wrote between when I was a CEO and when I came back to dedicate the rest of my life to writing, speaking, and teaching about the science of happiness.
Yeah.
This is really what I want to do. And if it gives some aid and comfort in the life of the strivers
Yeah.
that make us a prosperous and successful
Yeah.
society,
Yeah.
people like you and the
Yeah.
people like your listeners, then that's the job that I want to do. And I'm grateful to God for giving me that
Yeah.
opportunity.
Absolutely. I've loved the fact too that you're a man of deep faith. That's just so cool.
It's the center of my life. It
Yeah.
really is the center of my life. And the more that I study science, the more that I realize that is the right place for me to be
Yeah.
dedicating my energies and my marriage
Yeah.
and ultimately that's what I want to be. That's why I do what I do,
Yeah.
is because that's what God wants me to do, I
Yeah.
believe.
I love it. One last question before I let you go. Knowing that you're speaking to leaders right now who are influencing other people, any last words of advice, tips that you would give if you had a 5-minute conversation at Starbucks with a leader?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot that goes into actually what it means to lead others, but the most important thing if you want to lead others is you better be leading yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
The most important leadership task is understanding that you are your most important employee and you need to be self-managed appropriately. Nobody wants to follow a miserable person.
Yeah. That's
Nobody
right.
wants to be married to a miserable
That's right.
person. Nobody wants to have a miserable parent. The most ethical thing that you can do is to lead yourself by understanding your own well-being and getting better at that.
Yeah.
That's what's going to lift other people up. That's what's going to make you more effective. And you have an ethical responsibility to be paying attention to that. Many people believe that it's a selfish thing to be thinking about their own happiness, and that's only if you have a selfish worldview.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
have a worldview that self-care is more important than other care, no. But if you have a real understanding of what happiness is,
Yeah.
that you'll be taking care of that in the same way that you will to be a good parent, you need to take care of your health.
Yeah.
That's what you actually, so you can be around for years to come and take care of your children. That's the same thing when it comes to being a leader. And so that's why I write what I do, so leaders can be happier, so that they can be better leaders. That's what I teach my students. My MBA class at the Harvard Business School is called Leadership and Happiness. And the
Wow.
leadership part is just as important as the happiness part.
Wow. I love that. I wish I could audit a class. I'm going to have to find myself getting up there sometime. Arthur, this is exactly what I was hoping it would be. This conversation's been rich. You're going to bless many people. Thanks for carving out some time and being with us today.
Thanks, Tim. I appreciate it. Thanks for what you're doing to lift
Yeah,
people up and help leaders to sustain themselves and feel encouragement for yet another day of doing good in the world.
absolutely. You too. Have a great day.